Well, welcome everybody. I am Bob Royce, and I am happy to be hosting today's webinar, Preparing Your Organization for the AI Era, How to Develop an AI Strategy that Supports Human Flourishing. I'm joined today by Dan Klyn and Daniel Heck. And there we go. What we're going to talk about today, I'm going to briefly frame the conversation here for the first 10 minutes or so. And then Dan will talk about an information architecture lens that can help us deal with the complexity inherent in AI-powered solutions. And then Daniel Heck, our ethicist, will talk about how we can reframe our ethical systems to account for these new intelligent agents, which are machines, not people. And then we'll leave a good 15 minutes for discussion. There's also, you should you see now a poll has launched with a few questions that we'd love to get your feedback on. And when we get to the Q&A time, we'll look at those answers and incorporate some discussion around that into our discussion. So we are with the Understanding Group, and we're a digital agency where people empower people to make the complex clear. And we have a diverse team who love to evaluate, architect, and design complex digital places that are good for people. And we work collaboratively, both within our team and across to yours. And we love to work with you to create things that are greater than the sum of the parts. And I should also note, do feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section. We'll be monitoring those, and when we get to that time, you can upvote those as well. And so when we get to that, we'll look at those and pull from those in order to generate some discussion. So at the Understanding Group, whether we're talking about a digital workplace for a global foundation, or an app to promote digital mobility for an automobile, or gateways to large complex information systems, we think of them as places that are made of information, and we work to understand how they fit within their complex environment in order to create a good place. And we've had the opportunity to work for some wonderful clients, both large and small, from small nonprofits to Fortune 5 companies, and they rely on us to help them develop places that are resilient, useful, and beautiful. So what do we mean by the AI era? People are exceptional at our ability to use technology. And we've used, whether it's the technology of language that we use to create stories and communicate, or of the ability to work with things to build tools. Over time, the story of civilization has been one where we've used these to create more and more complicated machines that eventually led to the Industrial Revolution a few hundred years ago. And now, we've learned to basically work with those machines at an ever both larger scale, but also a smaller scale, to the point where we can now actually work with things, moving electrons around in registers, is basically software, and have used these machines to help us take our language, the products of our language that we create, and distribute them anywhere, anytime, any place. And now, as we enter this new era, going from the information age to this age of artificial intelligence, we find that we have created machines that are actually able to take the products of language that we create and not just work with them, but actually create language products themselves and manipulate language to create meaning and to actually do work, to create what Sam Altman refers to as magical intelligence in a computer. And unlike the Industrial Revolution, which took thousands of years to develop, and over the past century we've seen the fruition of the information age, this new age is going to unfold not in centuries and decades, but really over the next months and years. And that's going to bring about a very profound change. So much change that it's provoked a wide variety of forecasts as to what's happening, from Mark Andreessen, the co-founder of Netscape, who believes that the augmentation of human intelligence is going to create a world that gets much, much better from here, to Eliezer Yudkowsky, who believes that the most likely thing to happen is literally that everyone on Earth will die. Now, that's quite a range, and let's talk for a minute about, well, why is there such a wide range? Well, one of the things that has changed is we're moving from where our technology and the things we work with are simple to we've then moved into a world where they're more and more complicated, which produces things that are robust and often fragile, but generally consistent and reliable. So we're now living in a world where we increasingly recognize the nature of complexity that surrounds us. So the natural world is a complex adaptive system, and we've now learned to both understand the benefits of that and to see and build systems and machines that work within that complexity to get the emergent benefits that come from complexity. Nearly everything good and beautiful that we have is the result of things that emerged from complex systems, which is what leads us to the optimistic forecast from Mark Andreessen. But if you're familiar with frameworks like the Kniffen framework that talk about these things, you know that it can easily, things that are complex can tip into things that are chaotic, which then gets us to the doom and gloom forecast from Yudkowsky. And at the Understanding Group, we've been working with developing complex systems for the past decade. And in doing so, we've come to really appreciate this framework, this lens for looking at complex systems from Stuart Brand around pace layers. When we encounter a complex system, we find that it has multiple systems that are operating at different paces, different speeds, all at the same time working together. And we're typically working on bringing about some kind of innovation in one of the faster layers. But in fact, we also have to take into account what's going on in the slower moving layers that are there to basically bring stability to the system. And as the saying goes, fast proposes and slow disposes. And ideally, if we take those into account, we can create a system that combines learning with continuity and integration with differentiation. But we know that when we work with these complex systems, one of the things that the characteristic of complex systems is that they are dynamic. They're almost impossible to predict. And they are also subject to small inputs can produce very large outputs, kind of what they call the butterfly effect. So in the face of dealing with this complexity, we generally agree with how OpenAI talks about this, which is to realize that it's too hard to predict the future with any kind of precision, and that our goal needs to be to develop tight feedback loops for how we manage through it. So what we'll talk about today is how to lay some foundations to operate within those tight feedback loops. And it's important to recognize that throughout all of this, some things stay the same. And that is that our focus is on people. Our goal is not to create a system that optimizes for these machines to get work done, but really to optimize so that the machines help people get work done and that people accomplish things. And so the goal is, how can we use these machines to support human flourishing? So we'll then talk about how we can prepare for this era of AI in the midst of all this complexity and change. And so in just a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who will talk about a framework for architecting complex systems. And then Dan Heck will discuss how we can reframe our ethical systems to account for these new intelligent agents that are not people. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and welcome Dan. Welcome, Dan. Give it a second to introduce yourself, and then we'll share your screen, or I'll share your slides.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Thank you to all 63 of you who have joined us this afternoon. And if you've joined us in the last couple of minutes here, you were just listening to Bob Royce, who started a information architecture consultancy with me and a bunch of other people in 2011. And some of the people on the webinar I see are former students of mine from the University of Michigan School of Information. Thank you for showing up for this. It's so nice to see you in the list here. And I see lots of our former collaborators and colleagues, co-thinkers and clients as well. So welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm going to talk a little bit, and Bob, you can start up the slideshow again if you like. As Bob said, I'm gonna talk about a framework or an approach. Really, it's just sort of three moves you can make in the architecting of complex adaptive systems in order to be better positioned to do stuff and do it good in the age of AI. And when we started this company 11 years or 12 years ago, part of the reason we wanted to do that was because we were so inspired by what people in other fields knew and were learning about complexity and how to deal with it. And people in our own field as well, people like Marcia Haverty and Andrew Hinton, Jason Hobbs, lots of people talking about what if we didn't so much think of these websites and apps and intranets as gizmos, but what if we realized them, approached them as places made of information, places where humans dwell and thrive. And it's exciting to be still be here 12 years later, and in a world now where if we said to you 12 years ago, places made of information, that may have seemed like a metaphor. Today, that it's so true. We dwell in places that are made of information. So we're still learning from people who make places, and the idea that how places work is a way for us to address the complexity now of how networked information and technology works. And on the next slide, there's a recent contribution to my thinking on this from a former student of mine from 17 years ago at the University of Michigan School of Information, Alap Doshi. If you're here, hello. This is a book from some folks at the Stanford D School, and what they have learned and what we're trying to pick up and then cross apply in what we do are patterns of how stuff works, how places work in the built environment, and what's behind that. And these folks at Stanford have noticed a really interesting pattern between sort of if you can create enough structure to balance the forces of responsibility for the inhabitation of a place, like creatives in particular, trying to everybody coming back to the office now after COVID. How do we inhabit places well in ways that unlock lots of creativity, the stuff we can't do when we're here in our basements on Zoom? And the idea is what they found is there's a pattern. The more structure, if you create an adaptive structure that can balance and sort of feedback loops between adaptation of space and responsibility for the space, all of a sudden you get all of this creativity and productivity. And that's great. And on the next slide, someone else who's looking at the built environment and then also looking at the natural world and biology, Jeffrey West. And hat tip to my friend Richard Saul Werman, who introduced me to this guy, Jeffrey West. And what West observes, again, and we're looking for, what do people who are smart about how places work, how can they teach us how to deal with complexity? And what West has observed is, again, creating structure, urban environments or biological environments where the differentiation is happening and it's great and it's in balance with, it's been driven by more and more integration of what's being found. All of a sudden you get this network effect and boom, you get all of this emergence of life and growth. And man, there are ways that we want to do that. That could be great. And then one more sort of source that we're looking at, and this one is from our own field. There's some people in the call today who contributed to this. What we're learning about different ways of representing things and the ways that finding a balance between, in our work as information architects and people who work with representation, pictures, words, how we represent things in balance with how we associate things and how we juxtapose things, how we use what's familiar and what's unfamiliar to create all sorts of richness of human experience and meaning. So these are the types of things that we know that we need to bring to bear in digital places, things we've learned about other kinds of environments and how to thrive in them. So that's what we're talking about, is how to come up with structure how to notice the patterns that lead to more and more complexity, because that's the thing. That's what we're going to harness. That's what we're going to embrace. That's what we're going to love in order to get where we need to be to deal with complexity. And so what that means, and here's another gem from Stuart Brand, again, somebody who looks at how places work to think about how other stuff works. Uh, Boosting human complexity in particular, not mere complexity or the kinds of complexity perhaps that machines can make, but human complexity, that's an instrument of culture. And the instrument of culture we use here is information architecture. And so on the next slide, here's a picture of one of the books from our field. And the definition of what people who do this, what do they do? What do we do? We are the ones who make the complex clear, and we're the ones who are organizing patterns, noticing patterns like forces in relationship in order to harness them to thrive and build human prospering. And Werman has said lots of neat things and powerful things that help us. This idea of virtue and ethics and morals being essential to how you go about this, not starting with how something looks, but trying to get at essential fundamentals of making things be good. His credibility in this comes not only from building hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of communication products, but on the next slide here, and why Jeffrey West is also credible as a source on this, is the complexity of the urban environment where trade-offs have to happen in order to make things be good, where hundreds of stakeholders are balancing things together, balancing the forces in their environment together. That's what we're talking about, bringing to digital products and services that are harnessing the power of AI. We've already got tools for addressing complexity, and we can learn them from people who know about the built environment. Or we can be seduced by simplicity. Richard talks about the classic pervasive seduction to find solutions to solve problems instead of asking about what's good. And that is simplification. And anytime simplification is underway, on the next slide here is the perfect Windows desktop on a Moan field, the one time and the one part of the day that it looks nice. That's simplification, that's brittle, that's something that's frozen and pre-baked, and that never works. My students who are on this call, you will recognize the cartoon here that Bob will show in the next slide. The creator of this cartoon, Alex Norris, says that their cartoons, it's the same joke every time. And sometimes working in technology, it's the same joke every time of, I have this human complexity, this amazing, authentic stuff from the world that I need to bring into the project. And somebody's there to say, oh, and on the next slide, I can translate this as, oh, let's simplify. You've got complexity. None of that around here. We got stuff to do. So let's chop off the crazy bits. And that brings orderliness. That helps you create environments that are orderly, where you can put everything in the same kind of a box. But as another great architect, Christopher Alexander, observed, that's the mark of death, when everything is perfectly globally symmetrical, when everything is dealt with across the board, then everything is kind of okay, but nothing is good. And so what we're talking about instead here is, again, what nature does, the kinds of places where humans thrive. And we know what these look like. They look like this. And they look like this next picture here too, an old building that isn't so much orderly. The window pattern doesn't work here. You can see evidence of use over time. It's not so orderly, but there is order. What we believe in and what's important to us is encoded in here, like safety. Dan Heck, the ethicist who you will meet in just a couple of seconds here, came up with this idea, look up to look down. That's what we got to do to enter the age of AI. And yeah, it's great. These are the three, this is the framework for using IA to address AI, is how do you look up to look down? And the first move is to look inward. And anyone who's worked with us, there's lots of people on the call here who've done intention modeling with us. Picture yourself as one of those little dots and the sliders, and those are the aims that all the stakeholders have. And we have ways of getting into what's factually, morally, and authentically good in the world of the project to balance the forces that need to be harnessed in order for thriving to be possible. And then once we've done that, the next move is we can look around. Once we've looked inside, then we can sort of behold with a loving acceptance of everything that is a shared perception that's true of this is what the things are, how they've been implemented. And then lastly, then finally, we can look ahead, we can posit. And again, we like to look at how places work and say, this is how your place can work as an inhabited system, an implementation of a shared ethos rather, where everybody thrives. And that's what we can do together. We can love complexity together and make the complex clear. That's the value proposition of information architecture, making the complex clear. So I apologize for going a little bit long there, and I'm so excited to introduce you to my colleague, Daniel Heck.
Actually, you're 4 minutes ahead of time. So
awesome. So thanks so much for those and several presentations, Bob and Dan. Here's a little bit of background on me. I have 20 years of experience in nonprofit leadership and management. My work involves bringing together social and psychological research with social theory in applied and practical ways. I'm also a small business owner, and my nonprofit work has involved quite a bit of public policy advocacy work. So throughout my adult life, I've worked at the intersection of government, business, and nonprofit organizations. And to start, I'd like to describe where this phrase, look up to look down, comes from for me. I love looking down and being deeply immersed in a project, like an art project or an initiative, and I love the flow states that come with that. I also love looking forward, which is how I think of planning, and often we're planning over the next months or years. And I've been looking forward to the development of generative AI for about a decade or so. But as generative AI has emerged so rapidly on the scene, I found that I couldn't look forward and plan anymore. I couldn't plan like I was used to planning. And I know that that is an experience that a lot of us are having right now. It's like there's this skyscraper that has suddenly shot up out of the ground in front of us while we're trying to look ahead. And so we need to look up and climb that thing to look back down. And what I mean by that metaphor is we need to get a higher vantage point, a higher level of abstraction than we might be useful, just so that we can orient ourselves in this new landscape. And when we do that, it quickly becomes clear that the old type of planning isn't as possible as it once was. Instead, I think we need to take a cue from Sam Altman from OpenAI and develop high trust organizational cultures with tight feedback loops to constantly adapt to new scenarios. Because we aren't just dealing with an unprecedented wave of automation, we're dealing with an accelerating rate of automation for all kinds of productive activity. So we need to think and communicate deeply about what automation itself does to us as individuals, our sense of self-worth and place in the world, what it does to our organizations, and what it does to our society. And to that end, here at TUG, we've been developing a framework for thinking about that. Now, when you look at this, I realize that there's tons of text that is way too small here. And that's how it feels to plan these days, I think, sometimes. But it's okay. So this is a giant Miro board that we can dig down into to structure a variety of trainings and workshops to meet different needs, all while linking it into this broader framework of understanding and see how it all connects up. And so this can help teams, and is helping our team focus on the different elements at appropriate times, understand them, and then understand the relationship between them. So as we integrate them into our thought processes, our workflows, and our organizational structures. The goal of all of this is what you'll see here in the corner. Yeah, that's working. I've got the red laser pointer on there. The goal of all of this is to help individuals and groups align more deeply with each other and with AI agents today. Now I'm going to dig into just a few concepts that are really generative and quite deep in terms of their implications. And so these are the terms. I'm going to explain the terms agent, alignment, discourse, action, work, and labor in a slightly technical way. And if we invest a little bit of attention into refining these concepts just a bit, I think that our ability to talk about these systems clearly and understand what is happening to all of us will increase. So first, what are agents and alignment? So alignment is present wherever there are shared goals among agents. And an agent is basically some entity that has goals, or that we can at least understand better by understanding them as having goals. A core feature that large language models like ChatGPT and diffusion models, which are driving a lot of the art stuff, as well as adversarial network models, which are also finding new applications in art, one thing that they all have in common is that AI programmers have figured out how to give incentive structures or goals to sophisticated and sufficiently flexible computer systems that can then be trained to respond. They have goals. And this is why everybody is talking about AI alignment today. Alignment is present wherever there are shared goals among agents, and that is much more pleasant than having conflicting goals among agents. And the more deeply shared those goals are, the more aligned the agents are. Notice that alignment here is a matter of degree. It isn't a strict binary. And so this means that we need to enter into a journey of deepening alignment with each other and with these systems if we want to stay aligned and become increasingly aligned over time. The work of alignment requires the help of every single human being alive now, because I can't fully align a system for you without authentic input from you on what your highest and best hopes and goals are for you and your community and for all of us. So at its core, the problem of AI alignment is the work of creating social environments where people can contribute to that process in an ongoing way, in tight enough feedback loops to keep up with the rapidly changing environment. And at the heart of that is a special kind of communication that we call discourse. And this draws from the field of discourse ethics, which is, I think, it's been a core inspiration for me over the last 20 years, and I think it is more relevant than ever before. As we look, I think a core question that we're all asking ourselves up here is, what should we do when AI agents are used to automate more productive activity? And it's really urgent. I'm in touch with colleagues who are automating white collar work at the PhD level. They're making it 80% more efficient, and they're just getting started. And plenty of work that is close to my own heart in art and writing has become vastly more efficient even than that. This is already raising existential questions for all kinds of individuals and organizations. Seriously, what is going to become of us? And in response to the identity threat and existential threats that are posed by this, at least for people's careers, plenty of organizations have literally frozen, which is a standard human threat response, calling for freezes in the use of this technology in the face of the really radical organizational implications of both the efficiency gains and the new risks that these are bringing up. And so what does this do to your company culture and ethos and your need to retrain, recruit, retain, and motivate teams? I think it requires that all of our teams, that we come together and that we find ways to look up and look down. And it requires us to articulate whatever economic moat we as humans might have in general. And so I'd like to suggest, looking over here, that the clearest human moat that we have is that we are discursive agents and that AI agents are not. So what do I mean by discourse? Especially if that's what we've got to hang our hats on as humans. This is important. Discourse is communication that is authentically and directly oriented towards the good. Manipulative communication is not discourse. It's basically the opposite. And I think we're surrounded today by all kinds of communication that isn't discursive or that isn't very discursive. To borrow from Richard Saul Wurman, we have lots of communication that is about looking good, but we need communication that is about being good. And that's discourse. And being able to name this distinction helps us all practice and invite more of the factual, moral, and authentic communication that I personally constantly crave and that organizations need to cultivate if they're going to be effective and aligned today. Having a culture of naming and cultivating discourse in your teams will help them differentiate that from other types of communication. And those other types of communication often arise when we feel threatened. So naming and prizing discourse helps us address those threats and those power games so that we can have this discourse so that we can achieve alignment. So how does this differentiate us from AI agents, though? In a nutshell, AI agents can contribute to discourse when it comes to matters of fact and when it comes to matters of morality and ethics. They're getting better at it all the time. Sam Altman has estimated that in a year and a half, the hallucination problem is going to be solved with GPT-4. We'll see if he's correct, but he's worth listening to at least. But at least today, only humans can bring authentic self-disclosure to discourse. So I'll give you an example of this. I'm genuinely filled with joy to be talking to so many leaders in the public sector and the private sector and the nonprofit sector today. I firmly believe that we need to come together in new ways if we have any hope of creating a good and decent future for our families and our communities and for the people who depend on us for their livelihoods. Now, an AI can write that statement, but it can't be authentic about it. And what makes this authentic is that I'm really sharing my heart with you. This points us toward the centrality of experience to everything that matters. There's an experience that's mapping to. And we're often tempted to discount that, to discount human experience as if it doesn't matter. But I think if we just pause for a moment, we can clearly understand that without shared experience, we're almost as good as dead. It's the very core of what matters. So do experiences matter? I think they do, because life matters. All right, on to a few other concepts. I'd like to introduce you to a way of distinguishing between labor, work, and action that builds on the work of Hannah Arendt. Once we have differentiated ourselves as discursive agents in that way, I hope we can clear the air enough to frankly acknowledge the far-reaching implications of working with AI agents as well. And practically, I found that using these systems in my own processes often draws on my managerial skills much more than it draws on my technical skills. And so with that, let's differentiate these types of productivity so that we are able to integrate them again in new ways. So as you move down from action, you tend to get into work that is more implicit and routine. And as you move up from labor, you get work that is more abstract and explicit in the ways that we communicate. You also tend, in our culture especially, but cross-culturally too, to get into higher levels of management as you get up there. There are exercises that we can do to dig into this in more depth. But what I'd like to highlight here first is what it feels like. So as we go into higher levels of abstraction, this can feel annoying sometimes. And as we get down into labor, that can feel exhausting. And some of us work in areas that are heavily integrating both action and labor. We really work and are doing that day-to-day creative problem solving. And that can be both annoying and exhausting. And thank you to all of the workers who specialize in being annoyed and exhausted simultaneously. So these three distinctions are really key for three big reasons. First, labor, work, and action are all being heavily automated today. Creative artists and writers are some of the first people who have been and are already on the chopping block. And these are examples of classical action type behavior. They're synthesizing a lot of things. They are shaping our culture and our nations at some of the highest levels. And so if their work can be automated, I don't think we can safely say that any type of action can't be. I could go into more detail on some of the more technical types of action that are also being automated. But second, I think it's important that we honor all of these productive processes and appreciate how they all contribute to understanding. There is know-how involved in labor. There is understanding involved in the practical problem solving of work. And there is the leadership, courage, and broad picture synthesis that is evolved in effective action. At least insofar as we're engaged in any of these actions in a genuinely good way, and not just trying to look good, it's got to have those, it's got to have that understanding. And third, as we get in the habit of looking up to look down a lot more regularly, we need to appreciate how these layers of activity have always been nested in a kind of fractal way. So for example, you might look at somebody laboriously working through all of the possible solutions to a puzzle and see that's a form of labor. But that labor will often emerge from someone saying, I think I'll try this puzzle, as an expression, and maybe they are strategically choosing that puzzle among others. And so this kind of nesting is what opens the door to us looking way up and envisioning a world where AI ethics becomes deeply embedded in our action and our work and our labor today. What I want to highlight here is that AI ethics is not something that can be done just by an ethics department sitting over there making sure you're all ethically on track. You will not succeed at being good in this new landscape if you approach ethics in that way. Those are essential ethical expertise. So ethical expertise is essential to developing this kind of baseline. Organizations do and will need that, but our framework helps you understand how to start not only developing that baseline, but developing an ethical culture. And so what this means is that AI ethics becomes embedded in workflows too. And there's types of analysis that we can do, including discourse analysis and human agency analysis, that both enable and empower groups to do that sort of thing. This framework also helps us think about the constantly changing landscape of work, as we have to become conscious of what work is this month as opposed to what it might be next month. And it also helps us center the way we will be able to act in increasingly powerful ways to design incentive structures, both for ourselves and our teams and for AI systems. And so good action today is going to involve us acting on and in systems, I think, in new ways that we have not encountered before. So how do you actually do some of that stuff, though? And so this is part of the process of how we get to understanding and situating deliverables that can actually help you build the kind of organizational culture that is ethical enough to retrain, retain, recruit, and motivate teams of humans who are invited to embrace their discursive agency to help them integrate AI agents so that your organization can hopefully do more good than you ever imagined before. Think of the people who could use your services who couldn't afford them before, for example, if you have 80% efficiency gains or more in how you can offer some of them. I wish we could go into all of that today, but I just want to close by zeroing in on a couple key features of something at the heart of this, by differentiating a little bit more about discourse and a little bit more about agency. I've already covered the distinction between factual and moral and authentic aspects of discourse. Remember that as discursive agents, only humans can produce authentic self-disclosure. And this is what orients us together towards everything that really matters. These diagrams on the left help you see where those areas all overlap with authenticity. So pay attention to this yellow circle. It's going to be really important. I want to pause for a moment to also clarify the distinction between morality and ethics that we're using here. I think sometimes this gets missed in discussions of ethics. So morality refers to moral goods that are universally recognized across human cultures, and the field of moral psychology provides us deep insights there that we can get into more. Ethics refers to the particular ethos of your group or your organization. And if you want your work and organization to scale ethically and cross-culturally, you need both moral insight and ethical insight. So we draw on moral psychology within this framework to help you understand how powerful human moral senses are, how essential they are for human group coordination and the formation of group agents like governments and nonprofits and organizations. So I would urge you to not make the mistake of selling morality and ethics short as if they are nice add-ons or just a way of avoiding getting into too much trouble. They are part of our fast processing system, some of the fastest loops we experience, like color perception, and they are at the root of human group motivation. And this is why having a shared ethos rooted in human morality is absolutely crucial for team leadership and team management in today's environment. So I want to talk a little bit more about agency too. We can dig into this in different ways at other times. There's a lot of fun to have on each domain of this chart. But for now, I just want to draw out how this helps us think about an excellent question raised by some of our attendees before the call. So the question here was, how can we operationalize ways of dealing with bias in AI systems? And this is a fraught and difficult area. Not enough progress has been made in avoiding AI bias. And this is in spite of the fact that there are some extremely dedicated and intelligent people working on it. I'd like to suggest that part of the challenge is that we have to start addressing bias by thinking beyond bias to understand what people are even trying to get at when they talk about bias in the first place. So, for example, modeling and photo shoots, or professional modeling for pictures, has been replaced by AI agents already in plenty of situations. So a question that a lot of organizations are facing right now is this: if we're going to use AI photo shoots simulated, how do we make sure that we are representing diverse populations in an unbiased way? Representation really does matter for all kinds of reasons, and shouldn't our AI models look like people from across the whole society and across the world? It's not a terrible impulse, but you might produce materials and then receive really harsh blowback from people saying that you are co-opting and appropriating their appearance and their culture. And that blowback is warranted too. And it won't help you really at all to show that you have precisely and positively portrayed people of color at the rate that they occur in the population at large. Look, it's unbiased. And the issue here is that we talk about bias to try to get at deeper issues related to human agency. And the issues addressed by the language of bias overly narrow that discussion sometimes. The problem is that these technologies are rapidly expanding the agency of some people and rapidly contracting the agency of other people, especially artists and models and people like that at this moment. And there are pernicious injustices, such as the prison industrial complex, that also closely relate to these kinds of bias issues that are being reinforced. And so the justifiable anger that people feel understandably shapes these discussions as well. So we have to center human agency and understand it deeply if we want to frame discourse around bias broadly enough. If we're going to address the many issues that are raised, we have to start with a broad enough frame to get down to the level of really knowing what to operationalize, both through qualitative assessments and quantitative assessments. But there's a big insight at the sort of close of the thinking that I've been doing on this and that Tug has been doing on this. And I would summarize it this way: good assessment tools and good assessments arise from discourse. Discursive agents do not arise from assessments. And I'm sorry if that response is annoyingly abstract, but I genuinely think that's the kind of action we need to start with today, so that our work and our labor, including the work and labor of operationalizing bias, end up making sense and achieving the real goals that we have. So one more slide. I want to zero in and summarize by just focusing on these yellow areas here. So authenticity and understanding, you see the authenticity circle, the understanding circle, are uniquely human things. What the understanding group has always done is this: we help you generate the understanding that is an irreducible and absolutely necessary component of human agency. Without understanding, you're just getting random prizes at best. We help you have authentic discourse about what good means, starting with the same end in mind right there at the heart of discourse ethics, where all three of these areas of factual, moral, and authentic concern are integrated. And we help you understand what things are. This is the shared perception area, by both differentiating and integrating your authentically shared perceptions, talking to stakeholders and helping them integrate their insights. And we help you articulate your ethos so that it can be embedded in your information architecture in the same way that an access ramp or a fire escape also embody our society's ethos of honoring all human agents. We hope to do a lot more of that with you, as well as work together to figure out how to navigate the era of AI and create cultures of deepening alignment today. With that, I'll turn it back to Bob to bring it home and start the discussion.
Thanks, Dan. Let me share my screen again with one last slide. So, why didn't it share? Stop sharing. Let's try that again. Share screen. There we go. Okay, so just to kind of summarize, how can you prepare for the AI era, the era of AI, as we talked about? And just to kind of pull this all together, as an organization, look up to look down. So start by orienting yourself to this new terrain. Assess how ready you are to pursue good with the help of agents, in particular by really aligning and articulating and make explicit your organizational ethos. How do you make the tensions that are implicit within your organization explicit so that you can get alignment throughout your team? Because I think we're going to find these systems have the potential to both enhance and disrupt our social organizational systems in terms of how we do work. And so being very clear about how you're going to tackle some of these ethical things is very important. And then stop and look around. Take some time. We are used to structuring our organizations in particular ways and modeling workflows, but I think particularly since machines, a lot of that has been basically structured in a way that assumed that machines played particular roles, that they mostly worked at the labor area of that labor work action type of dichotomy, although computers have certainly supported our ability to do work and a little bit around the action, but not so much. And I think in this new era where we see machines have the potential to significantly impact each of those areas, it's important for you to understand how your organization does work and distinguish between those things. And then also to really get a handle on and mapping and documenting the organizational knowledge, goals, and interests that make you unique. These machines are going to be speaking on our behalf in some way, shape, or form. Customer service is a major application of these. How do we help them speak in a way that actually represents our organization? And that will require you to pull together input and things and structure that in a way that you can train those machines. And then with that, you're then in a position to look ahead, to develop a high-level map on how you want to go forward, to set up some of those early feedback loops, to begin to experiment with applying this technology in a way that is transparent to your organization, where people are aligned on what they need to do, and you have some sense on why you're doing it, so that you're prepared to implement things as these technologies arrive. And we would love to talk to you about that and talk about helping you work through those things. You could reach us at clarity@understandinggroup.com. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing so we can see ourselves and move into the question and answer space. So I think the poll questions are now up. It looks like it's quite a scroll there. And feel free, Q&A is open. We've got a couple questions queuing up. Let's just take a second and just kind of reflect on the response from the polls. It looks like for the most part, people are, that's probably half and half. Looks like it's 53% are more on the optimistic side, and the rest are either unsure or potentially pessimistic. So it's a good kind of sense of pulse. Everybody's bringing different experiences, and it looks like there are some people that have done very little work with this, but the majority have played around with it and are looking to or looking to figure out how to use this to help them with their work. And good 20% of people have actually been, or 20% of the respondents have actually been using AI to date, and in some cases have been using it for over a year, which is good. And then some questions around, do they have AI projects going? 29% have at least one underway. Another 10% or so, 9% are in planning. And the majority, looks like 40% either have 40 are in the learning phase, and some 20% still have no plans at all. And then this question on the relationship between your ethos and these generative systems. I would say it looks like the people kind of generally fall into the camp. So they want to use the technology, but need to figure out how to navigate the ethical tensions that they're facing. Or there's an area that could use more consideration, and they really need to think about it further. And then just a few people think it is intrinsically unethical, and they have a hard time envisioning using it, at least one person, and some are unsure. So let's take a look at the Q&A and see what answers. None have been upvoted, so I'm just going to take them in the order that they come, have been entered in. So William asks, a lot of focus on bias is on DEI types of biases, but there's much more work to be done to understand and address cognitive bias in IA as well, as these can also have negative impacts, ? I guess that's a question. Are there, do we feel that there's areas to address in cognitive bias as well? Does that make sense? Dan, you want to take a pass at?
I think Mr. Heck probably has more to say about this than I do.
Yeah, I meant Daniel. But
I'll take the first. I'll take the first approach, and then maybe we can have some conversation about it too. So cognitive bias is a core interest for me. I think it's incredibly illuminating for teams to understand cognitive biases and how they impact our behavior, so that we can address them to some degree. And I think that these systems, to a first approximation, we can think of them as having something like human cognitive biases, in part because they're trained on human data sets, right? And so they, in some ways, can reflect those. But I also think that anytime we're using these systems, we need to look at the human AI interface itself. And so you could have an AI system that is generating wonderful results, right? But human cognitive biases, such as availability bias, for example, make people think those results are terrible, and they are going to press them into the shape that it will reinforce things that seem, that seem very available to them because of the media environment that they're in. And so I think cognitive bias is really relevant to this, and especially relevant when we're looking at that moment of human technology interface.
Yeah, and the point of view that I have on it is that the cognitive biases that get encoded into the structure of things. So back to are you equipped to look around and behold how your values have been encoded in the things that you put out there? Those are that is what will be reified through the amplification, through the great power of these tools. So to the extent that any of the things that your product or service shows up like has the artifacting, like a building with a visible fire escape, your values, your ethics are already embedded in the things you have. And as the potential for multiplying them is nigh, it behooves us to look at them and to assess what is baked into them, and do we want that to keep being repeated as it expands.
So a lot of questions around equity, and this alignment type of thing. I guess one question is equity a goal for AI, or is equity a bias? Who is setting the goals for the various AI ethos systems?
So if I could, I can share screen. Let me try this. So this is the Miro board itself. I think this will work okay. So I'm bringing you right into our Miro board for analyzing this, and I think this provides a way of delving into this. So I don't think that equity is a bias. I think that equity reflects a universal human moral foundation and is what people cross-culturally are addressing when they're thinking about the good, especially morally. And especially in terms of both equality and proportionality, which we could dig into more, this is part of the good that we need to pursue. So that is a first approximation there. Now, having said that, bias relates to this in all kinds of complicated ways, both bias narrowly construed as a statistical concept and also bias understood as an ethical concept. And so I think there's a rich and complicated discussion to be had there, but that it starts with those universal human moral foundations and including moral goods in the conversation as part of what we should aim for.
Yeah. Lauren has a question that says, clarity comes when a group has shared alignment, understands how to distinguish between objective truths and subjective truths. So how are we thinking about the ramifications for minor misalignments, places where there's almost clarity? And I think, to me, I'm going to turn it to you, Dan Klyn. To me, that the intention models, I think, are one of the ways that we can help think about those kinds of things, where really many of those misalignments are really because we're balancing between two good things where both are good, and the question is not either or, but how do we strike the balance between them?
Yeah, we by and large set aside objective truth and focus on the subjective truth. And oftentimes the deciding is framed as a zero sum, as winners and losers. And so part of the approach to complex adaptive system building together, complex adaptive systems are always a we thing, not ever a me thing. Never a mastermind going, yep, here's the solution. And so to get alignment, we work hard. We have process that helps people move from narrow aims to expanding those aims through reframing, through the use of the play of language and meaning in ways that then allow all aims to be honored. And it sounds like a fantasy, but that's what we do. All of the relevant aims that need to be balanced can be framed in terms of we and in terms of yet, not in terms of either or. And it's something you got to see to believe, I guess.
Yeah. We have a question around, can we change the business incentives for creating AI models? That the models seem to be working on a business incentive of cutting costs at the worker level, but not necessarily executive level. Is it even possible to create ethical AI in this current business incentive environments? And I'll go ahead and answer that. I think, yes, it is possible to use AI in ethical ways. I don't know that we can change the business incentives and how things operate. There's definitely a risk associated with unleashing tools that of a race to the bottom, that those that use it in order to gain efficiencies will outcompete those in the near term for those that are trying to use it for higher order things. I personally believe that that is a mistake. I think we're going to find that these AI tools have something of a democratizing effect in terms of enabling more and more people to do more and more things, and that in that environment, the race to the bottom is a race to commoditization and extinction. And that those companies that survive are those that will actually work with these machines to create environments where people thrive and to enable people to be more productive themselves with each other, not to feed the machines. And that those companies are the ones that are going to attract people, and that companies that are purely using them to eke out efficiencies are going to lose. And then there's we've got room for just a couple more questions. So I'm going to ask, so Mike Moore asks, there's 28 vendors developing foundational models. Most AI projects leverage these to some degree. What should we ethical designers be aware of as we leverage things that other people with their own agendas have created and released? It's a good question. And I think it's challenging because in part, we don't know, we're not privy to all of the inputs that went into each of these foundational models. So to the degree that we're basing our views on which model to use based on the ethics they used in creating those models, we have some opaqueness that, at least at the moment, we don't know what goes into it. I think what we're going to find, it's hard to predict the future, but I think what we're seeing is, and it's expensive to build these foundational models at scale, but what we're also seeing is the rise of increasingly more and more open source models and people that are learning how to build these models more cost effectively. And so I think over time, we'll have more agency in that. But I don't know, Dan, do you have more to respond to that? Because I'm not sure. I think it's a challenging question to deal with.
Yeah, and with the brief time we have left, I'll just sort of like put a pin in that this is a fantastic question, and that we need to evaluate these models both on sort of their priors and their functions, meaning we need interpretability and insight into how they've been made and what they're doing. That's important. And in terms of their outputs. And both types of analysis are going to be important. So I just want to thumbs up that you're putting your finger on something crucial.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think we need to wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's really been an enjoyable hour. Like I said, we'd love to have follow-up conversations with you all. I apologize to those that we didn't get to answer your questions. We'd love to have follow-on discussions with you afterwards. Feel free to reach out. And at that, we're going to call it a wrap. Thank you very much, everybody.